Imagine you had the dream to become the hot dog eating world champion, and you had real talent for it. But one day, you got really sick after a competition, and after going to the doctor, you found out that you have a hot dog allergy. You're crushed by the news, but all your friends and family find it too awkward to talk about your failed aspirations, so they just stick to surface level topics. But maybe you wanted someone to ask about how it felt like to kill 100 hot dogs, to walk out 10 pounds heavier, knowing you were the champ. But you didn't get the chance to reminisce or to connect with others by sharing this memory. So what can hot dogs tell us about connecting with other humans? The Grant study, as it was called then, analyzed life outcomes for Harvard graduates and looked at what variables determined whether people thrived or not. The key aspect to a fulfilling life, they found, is human connection, particularly how much satisfaction people had in their relationships. Take loser boy Camille, a man who at age 35 was hospitalized for 14 months due to pulmonary tuberculosis. When looking back to his life up until that point, researchers noted that Camille was raised by parents who isolated him from others because they were pathologically suspicious, and that his childhood was one of the bleakest they'd ever seen. Loser boy Camille arrived at Harvard in 1938 and seemed constantly overwhelmed. He was skinny, physically weak, had no friends. In other words, he was a disaster. Then, on the other hand, we have Giga Chad John. Giga Chad John was an exceptional student and came from a wealthy family. At 35, Giga Chad John was married, had graduated top of his class in law school, and started a successful private practice. In his book, Supercommunicators, journalist Charles Duhigg recounts the story of Camille and John and asserts that the feeling of connection with another human is essential to our well-being. In this video, you'll get a playbook of how you can better connect with others, and you'll be surprised to hear that loser boy Camille is actually a superb example of what we should aim for. The researchers wanted to avoid guessing who would succeed or fail. It was really hard to avoid predictions when it came to Camille and John. Researchers assumed that Camille would end up miserable and isolated, and perhaps even end his own life, and that John would become a successful leader. However, decades later, Camille was no longer a loser. Now in his 50s, Camille had a wife, he was a leader in his church, and had become an authority in the medical community. He was a nationally recognized expert in allergy treatments and asthma, and even interviewed on television. His daughters described him as an exemplary father and highlighted that he had this innate generosity and that he even had the capacity to play like 5-year-olds do. Camille remarked that though he came from a dysfunctional family, he was slowly able to become, I quote, comfortable, joyful, connected, and effective. At 80, Camille threw himself a potluck birthday party, with over 300 people showing up. At 82, Camille died of a heart attack while on a climbing trip with his buddies. At his memorial, the church was packed. The priest praised Camille for a deep and holy authenticity, and his daughters remarked that he had a simple yet rich life. A researcher remarked, I quote, "Who could have foreseen that he would die a happy, giving, and beloved man?" On the other hand, Giga Chad John, by the time he was in his 50s, was not doing so hot. He was divorced and he was alienated from his children and family. His law practice was successful, but he only had a few friends and spent most of his time alone. So why did the tables turn for Camille and John? We may note that while John prioritized his career, Camille decided to devote himself to his relationships. During his fight with tuberculosis, Camille began to turn his life around. He started befriending patients, doctors, and nurses, he played cards, and held Bible study. And when he got out, he joined a church, school committees, and he helped organize community events. Really, he did anything to meet other people. The Harvard study of adult development, as it's now known, is the longest-running study in the world. And a key finding is that those that prioritize career and material success ended up unhappier and less healthy, while those that cultivated great relationships were way more fulfilled. But how do we connect with others, and why are some people so much better at making others feel at ease? Duhigg noticed that some people had an exceptional ability as leaders to make others feel heard. He calls these people supercommunicators. These people have a particular habit in conversation. They start by asking questions. By doing this, they quickly figure out what conversation the other person is looking for. Duhigg suggests that conversations fall into 3 categories: logical, emotional, and social. When we jump the gun, we're prone to not match the conversation type that the other person is looking for. Imagine you're telling a family member that your car broke down. They might say, "Yeah, that blows," and launch into like a 20-minute story about the first car they had in the 90s and how it was a piece of junk that barely worked. Perhaps they were trying to express empathy, but the whole time you were just waiting for the person to finish their story because you were late for work and you wanted practical advice because you just didn't know how to change the tire. You were looking for a logical conversation, but they replied with an emotional one. Or perhaps it's already later in the day and you mentioned that your car wouldn't start in the morning. Another person starts telling you to change your spark plugs, do oil checks, check your battery health, and yet the last thing you want to do at that point is discuss solutions to a frustrating problem that you solved hours ago. You were looking to complain and get some empathy, and yet the person just replied with a bunch of solutions. A super communicator is so attuned to the wants of the other person that they avoid this misalignment altogether, hence their exceptional ability to connect with and make others feel heard. A super communicator starts by asking things like, "Are you just pissed about the car, or do you want help fixing it?" This way, they figure out exactly what the other person is looking for and they don't waste time or energy on mistaken assumptions. Very often, a conversation might start with problem solving, say figuring out how to fix the car, but then the other person admits that they are stressed about the car. Now it's in the emotional category, and they begin to worry that they will be seen as an irresponsible worker for being late, and now it's in the social category. A super communicator is aware of these subtle changes, and when they're not sure of what sort of conversation they're in, they prompt for more information. That's what makes them such effective communicators. Duhigg makes the case that great communication is not a talent we're born with, but one that we can learn. It's a skill we can practice. We have circuitry in our brain that enables us to connect with others. Duhigg points out that when musicians are engaged in playing a duet, their neural activity is synchronized, but when one veers off into a solo, the synchronization stops. Conversation is much like this. Good conversation is when our brains are aligned, and to achieve this, Duhigg gives us the matching principle. Once we recognize what sort of conversation we're in, the next step is to match the other person. If someone is bent on decision making, you help provide solutions. If someone is expressing distress, you show empathy. If someone has a social fixation, you mirror that back to them. And by revealing what's inside your head, you invite the other person to in turn match you, which creates a path for connection. Duhigg also mentions a 2016 Harvard study that looked at speed dating conversations. This found that the most successful conversations involve people sharing their wants, their beliefs, their goals, and the most unsuccessful ones were actually the ones that stuck to very surface level topics. And then everyone leaves less satisfied. If you like this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe and to share with someone who might benefit from this message. What are your thoughts? Do you think these techniques would help you communicate better or perhaps thrive more? Let me know in the comments.